Redfall seems to have a chance to be a huge hit, and it's not only because of Arkane's reputation, Game Pass, or the popularity of the developer's previous titles with gamers. It's not because Redfall devs have stated that the open-world shooter is much larger than Prey's Talos 1 location, which is 720 meters, or 45 average gray whales. I've done some digging, and in the last couple days, the developers have also begun to open up more about what Redfall is. Redfall's been in development since right before Prey shipped. It's made by a studio with a stellar reputation for storytelling and gameplay by developers whose own worries during the creation of it is refreshingly familiar to a lot of gamers, even if it's almost alien in comparison to other companies' PR speech. This is Karak with ACG. Let's dive into Redfall. Why discuss this now? Well, it wasn't always that clear for a long time what the game was going to be. Up to 4-player open-world immersive shooter in a land where longevity experiments have turned the already corrupted men and women into vampires with many of the powers that you'd expect, but thankfully none of the romantic idolation. I think we can all agree one video, one interview doesn't make or break a game. A developer can tell you their game's about giants, but then not admit that you play as an ant. The context is lost until we experience it, in the same way that a game can look fun in a Twitch stream but may not resonate with you when you get your hands on it. However, lately the developers for Arkane have done an interview about Redfall, and in combination with other interviews and details, wrapping Redfall into a blood-covered package of understanding is not as difficult as it once was. Nevertheless, even the developers have expressed how much of a departure this is, stating, "Maybe we stretched too much this time. We probably should have picked either an open world or cooperative multiplayer, but if Redfall comes together at the quality level we think it will, then it will be a different beast. It's really tremendous. It does a lot of cool stuff." But at its core, it is a 4-player shooter, but also a co-op Arkane single-player game you can jump in and out of. An open-world title where you move around the game world and fight off vampires, but at any time can return home to your base and continue the story whenever you want. This was not always exactly known. Since Redfall CGI'd us into the future, comparisons to Back 4 Blood and now the ancient Left 4 Dead haven't stopped. Redfall's a multiplayer shooter in which a group of players must work together to eliminate the vampires from an open-world location in New England. It was natural for people to draw some parallels given how similar the games looked initially, and given the genre's widespread appeal. Left 4 Dead undoubtedly is going to be brought up. A game so old, a large number of gamers experiencing Redfall for the first time weren't speaking in full sentences when that title came out, though its sequel and that experience have built on the original title's success. We also can't forget the now refreshed and ultimately much better than its original release would have had you believe, Back 4 Blood. There's Remnant from the Ashes, Killing Floor, World War Z, Payday, creaking lineage aside, a recent developer interview with Games Radar as well as reading those other interviews have sort of allowed us to get the details and make it clear what comparisons should be made for this title and others. Arkane's Far Cry. Now, I get it. That might be a scary proposition. Far Cry games are so afraid of a single moment of downtime, the developers probably have a breakdown if you have like more than 11 seconds without a badger attack. The game's usual release is a buggy state, a broken one, with random symbols scattered across the game world so that every 7 seconds you're highlighting some goal, as if everyone in the world couldn't acquire their unsubscribed ADHD meds from a dubious subreddit. However, the developers have pointed out that the game's new locations, the hunting vampires, cruising through decrepit towns, and hammering humans with high firepower assault rifles, all are going to occur in a much larger world than Prey, an open world environment. And for many gamers, a small group excursion open world game comparison to Far Cry makes sense. But the developer themselves have compared it to not only Far Cry, but Stalker, a classic in and of its time. That is a massive swath between the two, though, identified by those two key points on opposite ends of the experience spectrum from open-world shooter games. This explains the developers' ideas for the wide ways that you can deliver the story versus the distinct trajectory that's intended when it comes to the multiplayer. But still, that's a bit too wide. If that were true, it'd be like saying your rocket will either go to Mars or to another star, but either one is going to be a success, though technically it probably would be. Redfall aims to deliver a familiar setting, though, compared to their past games, but then show how reality bends around the corrupted enemies of the game, still offering this oddly metaphysical but spiritual evil that you can track across a lot of the Arkane titles. But that does bring us to another discussion: size. Well, sometimes size does matter, especially when it comes to how you're going to tell your open world story. Let's put it into context. Prey was based on a space station, while its verticality and realistic movement throughout its labyrinth of locations was astonishing. It wasn't particularly large when compared to many other open world locations, especially ones we expect and see now, something that Redfall is being compared to. Does that mean this is just all hyperbole? No. To me, it harkens back to what Arkane is trying to do with Redfall and merging all their past experiences together, including titles like Deathloop. Deliver a game that's open-ended and more harmonious with continued pushes into enemy territories, returning to your own home base, and the entire situation feeling like a threaded experience. Much like a full-fledged version of the few-note multiplayer that we saw in Deathloop, or the scary but shambling wreck of Prey Typhon Hunter. Or maybe it'll end up more like that almost blockbuster level of freedom that Moon Crash offered, or maybe a combination of all of them, with players returning home to lick their wounds between excellent moments that reflect the best part of those games, combined with the action that they're looking to deliver. Redfall split across two vast but open-world connected environment types. A large town that can be made safer and safer with continued missions in the area, opening new safe houses and locations unlocked by townsfolk that haven't been drained like fruit packs by the vampires. The other section is more rural, with assorted farms, forests, and secluded locations where battles will have a different feel, where the closest safe house might be an unsafe distance away, and pushing into the game's darker sections can be the difference between life and death, but the rewards will be commensurate. A push and pull of distance and death that looks to continue to somehow tell the story even as you're moonwalking your retreat back to your homestead after a bad decision, whether alone or with others. Open world games usually mean not only distance, but time. The two are connected. The very enjoyment of these kinds of games isn't just exploring and finding a new location, but sometimes looking back on the miles traveled and then Forrest Gumping your way even farther. It's not hard to imagine story elements like Prey had, using immersive sim parts in the story, then switching over to something closer to Stalker and its stealth-like gameplay as you work through a land and the ruralness absolutely soaked in the blood of those too unlucky to survive or sadly siding with the enemy. Both of those components take time, and that's not a small factor in Redfall, which brings us to time. The open world is always bracketed by a day-night cycle that changes the world around you, with each of the game's three groups battling it out against one another, hunting one another, or retreating and being decimated as battles consistently rage around you or do to you. As the day continues into night, vampires come out and push more easily into the game world. This isn't the first game to do a day-night cycle where night's more dangerous. It's not even the 30th. Fighting changes. Nighttime shortens your view of enemies, tightens down your ability to engage with enemies at range. It will depend on how Redfall handles this, but it is a gameplay element we've seen used many times for positive and negative returns. Will it plunge the world into an eclipse-like darkness requiring lights, or people making ping sounds like human bats trying to get back home? Probably not that last one. But what it could do is cause a change in your gameplay depending not only on your weapons, but the characters with you, the mission you have, where you are, as well as just how far you can see. And if in the distance is your home. Speaking of home, Redfall's characters have a main base, a location where NPCs give out quests, where missions are unlocked, where upgrading has some kind of occurrence here. While the developers haven't dived into being able to customize the base itself, it lends to some questions. Why are the people there? Why is this location safe? And for customizations, do the sheets match the drapes? If they don't, can we buy new drapes? Games are pushing altering your base in many different styles. All games seem to have it now, a central location where you have different battles and you return back to it. Against the three enemy groups here within Redfall, this world will most likely have you planning out just a little bit more, and also be driven by the story and the enemies that you've encountered to decide where to go next, but not locking any of them off into hubs. So once again, that comparison to Far Cry and Stalker do make sense. But many of these titles that have come out do have a little bit of danger around the main base itself. Will this title have it? And will it be because of the enemies or something else? Because Redfall isn't just vampires. Redfall's enemies include the vampires, but it also includes a security firm that's solidly more shooting first and asking never, as well as cultists, humans who worship the vampires within the game world and want to be turned. In fact, a lot of the different mid-level enemies will be those kind of characters. FYI, to start a cult, you need 3 founding members not related by marriage or blood. I found that out. One thing you're going to notice is that Arkane has gone with now a very popular 3 enemy group setup, not counting environmental hazards like tripping in a cornfield or scratching your nuts on a nail when you leap through a broken window, but true enemy groups. You're going to notice this 3-pointed grouping of enemies in a lot of games now. It's something we're often seeing. More importantly, these groups also fight one another. Cultists versus security force versus vampires. Then enter the player, but only on foot, because they've made it very clear no vehicles are here. Arkane wants to say no to driving around. This worldview is also spread out across a location and its risks. A location you can't drive around because there are no vehicles changes the entire way the game plays. Exploration isn't terrassing through the countryside in your vehicle that handles more like an RC car and smashing it into a cabin. It's moving with others slowly, with both entry and egress tracked to the same exact speed for everybody. There's no slow entry then leaping into a car for a fast exfil. To me, this is one of the best decisions Redfall has done. It does make you wonder exactly how the security force showed up in the game world, or did they all just pedal on bikes that rusted instantly? But we'll have to see. That slowed down speed and more tactile feel is going to end up benefiting Redfall a great deal, especially because these characters, as they go out there, will be continually collecting stuff and trying to get back home at least a little bit alive. And that does bring us to characters, because no plan survives contact with the enemy. And the one broad stroke that we see about the characters is, well, we don't have a ton of data about the characters. We have a little bit about their skills and what they might be using. We have 4 characters, Devinder, Layla, Jacob, and Remy. They're the main 4. We know that they have their own skill lists, and we know that Redfall will have a large amount of narrative both from the onset as well as the story progresses about each character. Arkane says if you play the game alone, it's much like an Arkane game of the past, at least in terms of progression, investigation, action, and story beats. But 4 characters, how's that going to change things? Each one has their own skills and abilities, so much so that Arkane has said that 4 players can possibly play the same character in the story without really feeling a lot of overlap. Now, some of the skills also buff other players when a skill gets high enough. For instance, the ability to use stealth for yourself, once you upgrade it to a point that's high enough, it actually spreads to the teammates as well. We don't know exact numbers for everyone, but one character has been shown to have 38 skills across a number of skill trees. This ability to play all of the characters will be one of the largest hurdles that Redfall has, and something that could be a tripping point. Anyone who plays any kind of 3 or more co-op shooter can tell you where I'm going with this. Many times, even with different skills, there are moments where you feel like that overlap of theme and tone and ability doggedly chases down individuality and beats it to death under skills that have different names and unlock levels, but can become surprisingly familiar. This is why games like Back 4 Blood have done so well, legitimately changing much of this with its card system. So far, no other such system exists in Redfall. Perhaps Arkane will find ways to allow for players to play alone or in groups, but consistently always feel different. Perhaps story beats will change abilities or items that characters carry. We just don't know. We also see that apparently all characters appear to be able to use all weapons and carry unlimited numbers of them into battle, with pictures being shown of characters whose backpacks are filled with rifles and handguns and rarity types. We do know some characters, though, skew one way or the other. For example, more stealth with sniper rifles. That might be one of the situations where you have a particular weapon locked to a particular person. And will another level of flexibility be added due to crafting, construction, or item gathering? But Arkane has stated that weapons won't be something you carry for long, outliving them or finding others with different bonuses that change and adjust, and you might find a more useful weapon as you continue on. In particular, some weapons have up-close attacks that fare far better against powerful enemies than others. The weapons do level up over time, but the idea seems to be that players will still be moving between newer weapons and older ones quite often. And they have a garden gnome spear and a guitar spear. They also have a Dishonored-inspired whale harpoon. All of those are going to be excellent to join in the team or just go it alone. But is it one for all and all for one? No. One place that Arkane has been solid as their information is that the host's storyline is the only one that continues at all during group gameplay, meaning you have to repeat every single mission, main and side, even if you played them with others. They want their story beats to hit like a single-player game, which for them also means locking it down for just the host of the game. Games with restrictive story progression tied to the host always end up becoming hostages in the hostile camps of gamers, usually aligning themselves with the militant 3 ideas of those who hate it and won't play it, those who begrudgingly jump in still wanting to experience crossplay and story moments but feel like their time is probably a bit lost, and those diehards that are fine with repeating missions they've already done with the reward being the items versus narrative gameplay beats being surprising for them. Regardless, that does leave a gap. No matter how it's explained, it causes frustration. Arkane has a game with a huge number of facets, from single-player, arcane expectant gameplay, multiplayer missions, side missions, an open world with story beats, and, well, traveling on foot. And that's one place that I want to point out. Traveling to a store for 50 minutes just to see a story beat because you want to get to the next one, but already experienced both, isn't always very fun. A switch or a toggle for this would do very nicely for some gamers. As of yet, it doesn't seem to be the plan. So in many ways, the other players in the host game are just NPCs, and the game does not have any bots at all. And while I do point this out as a weakness, it's not always a bad idea. It's just sort of a mischance. I know that many would be super happy playing Prey with another person, or Dishonored, Wrath of the Outsider with a friend, but it is important to point out that those were first and foremost single-player games, and any addition would be modded into an experience that was already completely on display, showing the excellence of a single-player game. Here, Arkane has bitten off a massive chunk to try to deliver this. Their desire is to somehow transition from a single-player manuscript that they faithfully read and uses as an instruction booklet for their games since Bible times doesn't fall into the need for repetitive tropes like Deathloop, but still ends up delivering a lot of the same story beats in a multiplayer game is going to be difficult. Moving to up to 4 people in the title, this is going to try to hold true to that story. All of these goals have to be looked at by Arkane and hit perfectly. I am incredibly excited to see how all of this comes together, and the openness in which we're getting information about Redfall has made me go from not really interested at all to much more interested. And Arkane has stated 3 important things. They've worked with the partner studios at Bethesda to make sure the game feels good, not only in combat, but in movement and stealth. Next up, Game Pass and Microsoft's massive delivery system is a hugely exciting prospect for them. And we all know that their games don't necessarily sell incredibly well. But knowing that in one single moment a ton of people could be playing your game instantly is both awesome and probably scary as hell. 3. They're trying to deliver Arkane gameplay no matter what. They've changed to an open world massive game and one based on shooting and collecting items. But at the same time, they've tried to make sure that within those distinct parts, there is still that feel of Deathloop or Prey. Will they deliver on it? I don't know. But I do feel like there's a lot more going on here with Redfall than was initially perceived. Redfall is Arkane's staff who've worked together for more than 20 years, from the classics to the less classic, from the out there worlds to the world that makes you point and say, I want to go there. I'm excited to see what they do here. I think that they have a lot of great ideas. This new information has been phenomenal, and it does look like a title that maybe could see Arkane finally get the success that I think a lot of people hope they will get, at least commercially. So anyway, that's it for me. The YouTube algorithm is a complete soul-sucking undead vampire of its own. To help out, I would love for you to share this, leave a comment, thumbs it up, put it wherever you can, discuss it. I would love to hear what you guys think of Redfall. Excited for it, not excited for it? What do you think of the new information? Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.